Hi, this is Bill Lord for UNH Cooperative Extension, talking to you today about one of the most rewarding aspects of home gardening, growing tree fruits. The tree fruits that grow best in New Hampshire are apples and pears, but other tree fruits like peaches, nectarines, cherries, plums, and even apricots can be grown on really good sites in the southern part of the state. But first, let's talk a little bit about apples, since that is the one crop that grows best throughout the state. First thing we need to remember about apples is that when we purchase trees, we need to purchase at least 2 different varieties. This applies to apples, it applies to pears, applies to sweet cherries, most sweet cherries, and almost all plums. Why? Because without cross-pollination, pollen from one variety of that fruit being transferred to another variety of that fruit, we will not set fruit. A single McIntosh tree or 2 McIntosh trees planted together, for example, simply will not bear fruit. The other thing we want to pay attention to is what size tree we're going to purchase. From this point below, from the graft union down, is a rootstock. In the old days, that rootstock was simply an apple seedling or a pear seedling. But today, more often than not, it's either a dwarf or a semi-dwarf apple or pear variety that results in a tree that is smaller, easier to manage, bears fruit younger in life, and in general is much more satisfying for the home gardener. When we're dealing with dwarfing rootstocks for apples, if you're dealing with a true dwarf like Bud 9, plan on spacing trees about 7 or 8 feet apart. If you're dealing with semi-dwarf trees like Malling 7, and this would be typically what you would get in the nursery trade, plan on 12 to 15 feet between trees. If you opt for the old-fashioned so-called standard tree, where the fruits are grafted onto where the apples are grafted onto apple seedlings, plan on 25 feet or more between individual trees. With peaches, we typically space trees at about 12 to 15 feet, and we rely on heavy pruning as our dwarfing technique. When we plant these trees out, pay attention to tree shape. What we're looking for as our final tree shape is sort of an open Christmas tree shape. A single trunk, or leader as we like to call it, a skinny top, and a wide bottom. With apple trees, the business end of the tree are the spurs. Spurs are short modified branches that appear typically on growth in its second year of life. And these short modified branches or spurs produce flower buds at their terminals. When we're pruning, it's really critical that we never remove these fruiting spurs. This is the part of the tree that's going to give us the fruit in the future. Constantly tipping the ends of branches will actually delay productivity and reduce fruitfulness over the life of that tree. So concentrate on making a few larger cuts that solve the structural weaknesses of the tree. Leave the terminals alone and protect these fruiting spurs. That's the part of the tree that's going to produce our fruit. This is a young peach tree, and peaches and nectarines, rather being pruned in that central leader system, that Christmas tree shape that we talked about for apples and pears, is instead grown in an open center because of its need for extreme structural strength. Peach wood is quite brittle, the fruits are extremely heavy, and they're produced out on the ends of branches on 1-year-old wood. And to try to reduce the risk of tree breakdown, we prune by removing the center of the tree, creating an open vase or basin with very strong, wide branch angles. One of the things you'll notice about this peach tree is that the bark on the lower part of the trunk and up to about 2 feet above the ground has been painted white. It's been painted with white interior latex paint. That paint serves 2 purposes. First, it reduces the risk of winter damage by reflecting the warming rays of the light in the cold days of winter. By preventing the bark from warming up, it eliminates that freeze-thaw effect that occurs when the sun goes down late afternoon. The type of injury is typically called southwest injury, and paint plays a key role in reducing that risk. This should be a standard practice for all your young fruit trees. The second role that paint may play is to help reduce the attractiveness of this tree to borer invasion. So trunk borers can be a problem with young fruit trees in particular. Paint may serve as a potential repellent to reduce that risk. We typically do not recommend mulching fruit trees. We do need to control grasses and weeds around the trees. That should be done mechanically by hand. But the use of mulch is going to provide habitat for voles and could increase your risk of vole damage. You notice that we have a vole guard around the base of this tree. Very important part of the orchard plan is to make sure vole guards are installed around these young trees. These wire guards allow air and, more importantly, light to penetrate to the trunk of the tree, so very, very important. The other creature we need to worry about, unfortunately, is the deer. And so a fence or some sort of system to keep deer out of the young orchard is really critical. They not only will feed on the shoot tips, they'll also feed on the fruit spurs and the fruit itself, but deer feeding on fruit trees can delay production many, many years and reduce the chances of success in your orchard to almost zero. If I'm looking at a site at home, I want a site that's got full sunlight and hopefully has nice, well-drained loam soils, and hopefully a site that has elevation relative to surrounding land, so there's less risk of spring frost damage to the flowers. Once you've selected a site for your tree fruits, be sure to have your soil tested. Tree fruits grow best when the soil has a pH of around 6.2 to 6.8. Cooperative Extension can help you secure an appropriate soil test, and will make recommendations for the amount of lime, if any, that's needed to be applied prior to planting. Beautiful crops of fruit like this can happen at your home. It requires buying the right trees, taking care of pest control, paying attention to pruning, light to moderate pruning every year. But with good care, beautiful fruit can be the reward.